And let's begin with our big story for this morning. We take a hard look at Nigeria's economic trajectory in light of the latest calls from the International Monetary Fund. The IMF is commending Nigeria's recent fiscal reforms, smarter spending, stronger tax systems, but it also is raising alarm bells. It points to risks from domestic borrowing, rising debt, and capital flight. Now, this is an economic reality check. And the question is, are we on stable ground or are we just teetering on the edge? Zeno.
Well, with us this morning, we've got two distinguished guests. Professor Ken Ife, development economist and also public policy analyst, and also Professor Bongo Adi, professor of economics at Lagos Business School, will probe whether Nigeria is doing enough, where the risks lie, and what structural shifts are required to curb capital flight and also deliver sustainable growth. Now let's begin. I know Professor Ken Ife is with us. Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for joining us very bright and early, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, as our first guest, I mean, you really set up early for us, and we want to say thank you very much. Sir, the IMF has raised very interesting points here. First of all, it commended Nigeria. It says fuel subsidy removal, of course, that was a necessary correction. Tax reforms, step in the right direction, and also steps towards exchange rate unification. Oh, yeah, well, we're still working on that one. It, however, raised other concerns. Among these concerns was rising public debt. You can't continue to tax the public, even if you're reforming your tax base, yet without producing. But I'm very, very curious regarding what the aim of the IMF is. Is it a partner right now? Is it acting as a partner, or is it acting as a pressure pot for Nigeria? And what are the impacts of these efforts?
Yeah, you need to put World Bank and IMF in the same basket because they're all Bretton Woods institutions who have a responsibility to police the economy and especially the monetary side of it. Now, the good thing, let's start with the good news before we head into the bad news. The good news is that our reserves have gone up to over $42 billion from about 33. Our growth to our debt to GDP ratio has come down from over 45 or 50%, of almost 45, and now down to 39%, which means there could be more headroom. Our budget deficit has also dropped to 2.6, and a lot of indicators are positive. Our foreign exchange regime is under control, allowing some inflow, albeit from portfolio investment rather than foreign direct investment, because that's a big trouble there. Then told that the GDP growth rate has gone up to 4.2%, and then rebasing of the economy has also affected the interest rates, the inflation. Inflation is now around 18.2%. All of them are good ticks. You tick everything is good, but it still comes to the main crunch. The crunch is that all this growth we are having are not inclusive. They are not leading to employment, and they are not having any effect on poverty reduction. And there's so many reasons that have been advanced for those. And in fact, even in the World Bank analysis, their report, they went head on what I have been screaming about over the last 4 or 5 years, that we have more to answer on fiscal sustainability. We just are not there. We are totally working against the fiscal law, 2007. And there's so many of it, there's so much to talk about that when you have the time. And then we could do more. They actually hammered on food inflation, and gratefully, food inflation has come down today, to deliver this 18.2% inflation. And I'm thinking we can do more. And the last straw is, of course, what they say about, increase the social safety net, which I agree, but not from borrowing. You can do that with anything you want. You earn 36 trillion with your your target in September. Spend that money. If you want to share that money. Don't go and borrow money to share. And I keep saying it to World Bank, you cannot lend money to Nigeria only to be used on conditional cash transfer because it's illegal. So give us your grant and we can share those. So they have now finally come back to acknowledge that is the case, that they should borrow, they should use their resources to expand the social safety net. So these are some of the things that are there. And the warning is always there about debt sustainability. That has been a big standing warning. And we'll find time to go into that detail.
Okay. Professor Ken, you talked about unemployment, the fact that there is no employment in Nigeria, despite the reforms that are being made. So I'm wondering, when we talk about capital flight, which is also directly responsible for the unemployment that we have in Nigeria, are the reforms that Nigeria is making now capable of reinstalling investor confidence, bringing them back to Nigeria so that we can have more jobs? Are we walking in the right direction, albeit that is a very slow process?
Well, you see, you've jumped the gun. You're talking about bringing investors, bringing investment. Investment in what? And what enabling environment do you have for the kind of investment that you want? And let me tell you the investment that you want. You see, we are an import-dependent economy by design, by the International Division of Labor, by the 800 years of extractive relationship, repressive and oppressive extractive economic relationship between Nigeria and the global north. And if your economy is import dependent, it doesn't matter what you say, what you do, any macroeconomic, global macroeconomic headwind will affect you. What otherwise, even if it is health or COVID or supply chain disruption, it doesn't matter what it is, it will affect you. Otherwise, why will Russia crisis affect Nigeria when we have gas and oil and they have gas and oil? It's because Russia supplies 40% of gas to Europe, and when they turned down the tap, prices went up, and Europe is our second largest partner. So we carried it. That contagion effect comes as an inflation pass-through. So we're suffering from those. And the problem is this: when you are exporting raw material, which is what the design is, you are actually exporting your jobs and you are importing poverty. That is the point. So unless we look at two strategies, one, export-led growth strategy, and then link it to an industrialization strategy. And China has been able to remove over 400 million out of poverty because of export-led strategy, growth strategy. So is Indonesia, Malaysia, South Korea. All these countries, hundreds and hundreds of millions of people are removed from poverty. But we are nowhere there. So it's not easy a lip service to say NEPC, go and do that. They're doing nothing because the NEPC cannot even talk to the Minister of Finance or even Central Bank. So what we require is an orchestrated approach to developing a serious commitment to industrialization of our country. And for you to do this, all the macroeconomic policy frameworks must focus on industrialization and tell us what they're going to do. The biggest culprit is fiscal policy. I can't begin to name to you the damage that has been done to an industrialization by the fiscal policy. From opening the door, and then all the textiles from China entered here, 2 million jobs. All the factories in Kanu, Kaduna, and Lagos, gone. Or is it the tire that we are manufacturing, or is it the car that we are assembling? It is there that the problem lies. So, and then the other one, that the trade policy, we haven't even got one yet. You need to have one that points to industrialization policy. You have to have investment industrial policy. You don't have one. You have one that points to that. Then central bank has to come back and tell us what it can do to this agenda, as well as employment posts. All the convergence of the multiple policy must come and address industrialization.
Let's bring in Professor Bongo Adi. He is a professor of economics at the Lagos Business School. You're welcome to the program, Professor Adi. I also have to ask you, Professor Ken has set the tone for my next question, which is going to be about structural constraints as to why Nigeria still doesn't have that credibility when it comes to delivering on its promise, giving the fiscal policy reforms that this administration has taken on. But most importantly, the IMF has also warned that about 20 sub-Saharan African countries are at risk of debt distress, and Nigeria is not immune. And so when we look at our vulnerability, where does it lie? Is it in external debt? Is it on our exchange rate exposure, or a rollover risk? Professor Adi.
It is a combination of all the things you mentioned and more. If you're referring to the risk of contagion, I think Professor Ken has already detailed that. When we depend so much on the rest of the world for our revenue, our fiscals, if I may say that, you are so exposed to whatever happens. Any global macroeconomic turbulence will definitely throw you out of order. Yeah, but having said that, are there things that we can do in the short and immediate and long term to create a buffer, of resilience against all that global turbulence? I think there are. Professor Ken also mentioned, the issue of Russia's gas supply to Europe, whereby Europe is also our very strong trading partner. Even though I know that, trade relationship has really shifted in the sense that China is now our major and leading trade partner. So, but then Europe, in terms of proximity, is very close to us. When it comes to fiscal sustainability, because that's the whole thing we're talking about here, which is what will really insulate an economy against volatility, contagion effect, and also give it that resilience to navigate through different economic situations and be able to create conditions, enabling conditions for industrialization and improve livelihood and welfare for its citizens. So it's all about fiscal sustainability. Now, Nigeria is actually at an advantage position, which we have failed to exploit over the years. And I need to talk about this again. Mm-hmm. Now, Professor Ken actually said something that is very important, and it's good that we recognize that we are, kind of a primary commodity exporting economy. That's all. And moreover, our export profile or export space is not diversified. We're only exporting crude oil majorly. So every other thing is just very insignificant. Our non-agricultural exports, is not that much. Our, participation in global value chain is also negligible. But then, recent turnaround in the system has shown that it is possible for Nigeria to actually launch its way back into the global value chain, which is the real issue here. I keep saying this, for any leading product that you can mention or that you can refer to today, you will notice that not just Nigeria, that no African country participates in this value chain. Whether it is in the semiconductors, in computers, or any manufactured product. So we are the consuming end of it. And once you are either the consuming end or at the raw material end, you are not part of that value chain because you're not adding any value to the chain. But then is it possible for us to really participate actively in this dynamic and life-changing global value chains? Yes, it is. I was talking about the recent changes or turnarounds that we've witnessed, which is the Dangote refinery. So there are two value chains that we currently participate. I mean, which is, like I said, an advantage that we have over so many other African countries. We are in the global value chain for refined petroleum, thanks to Dangote. We are also in the global value chain for something like fertilizer, thanks to Dangote again. We are also in the global value chain for gas, thanks to LNG. Okay, so now these are things we've seen how they work, and we know the models that make them work. So is it possible for us to leverage these productive and efficient and profitable models that have launched us into the global value chain to see if there are other areas that we can expand? Now, talking about gas, I learned just like last week, the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline has hit Morocco. So it is now at the last phase before it gets to, I think, either Spain or Italy, and then our gas should make its way to Europe. These are, investments that should have been done many years ago. But then now that we are seeing them, we want to see government's commitment to this, because I don't want to, belabor the obvious issues of the things that we are not doing right. But then let's focus on the things that we're doing right. Is it possible for us to leverage those areas to turn around things here? I think yes. Nigeria has some promise. If we're able to pursue the gas agenda and get our gas to Europe, as it is always said, Nigeria is actually an ocean of gas, right, an island, whereas oil is just an island. So we are more of a gas nation. So we can actually leverage that, okay, to turn around our fiscal situation. We've seen that it can be done the model of LNG, the model of Dangote. So these are things that we should do in the short, short and medium and long term, that will turn around the prospects of, of the nation.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about the tax reforms and all of that, because I have a different opinion regarding whether those things are going to work, whether they're going to improve welfare. Because the way you look at it, we need to look at it critically before we can actually draw any sort of conclusion on those.
All right, Professor Adi, very quickly, there's a report that we saw, a review, that noted that Nigeria's currency depreciation has raised the local currency burden of external debt, even as reforms have improved somewhat transparency, some will note. But given global volatility, which you've pointed to, and also Professor Ken has pointed to, how should Nigeria manage its exchange rate? Very importantly, whether should it be more flexible with buffers or a hybrid approach?
About exchange rates, exchange rates for me is a second order issue in economic development. It's second order in the sense that in economics talk about first order condition and second order condition. So you need to meet the first order necessary, okay, before you now go to the sufficient condition, which is second order. Now, exchange rate management is only about monetary issues, and I regard that as nominal. The real thing here is that we need to grow our economy so that we're able to export. Okay, Professor Ken was talking about that industrialization, and that's what I was referring to, the things that we can do to be in the global value chain. Supposing that we are able to pump our gas to Europe, okay, you do not know what that will do to our economy. Suppose we are also able to maybe support systems such as Dangote's of this world, so that we can have such turnaround in some other sectors, right? What would that do to our fiscal situation? Because it's only when we are taking control of that we can now begin to talk about exchange rates. You cannot manage your exchange rate, effectively or advantageously when you are challenged with imports. You are not exporting. Right? You can only export, you can only manage your exchange rate effectively and in a way that it insulates you against global volatility if you actually are exporting and your foreign reserve is growing, right? That is the only buffer you can have against exchange rate volatility. It doesn't matter what the central bank does or what the monetary planners do. Okay. If you're not building your export ability and competence, you're not driving an export-led economic growth, you cannot manage your exchange rate. It's as simple as that.
Okay. Let me come back to Professor Ken. Professor Ken, I hear what you and Professor Adi are telling, and it's all about providing for the people. To provide for the people, they must have jobs. To have jobs, you must have industrialization. To have industrialization, you must have, what do you call it now?
Buffers and transparency and
and also investors as well. To create that enabling environment for investors, they need a few structural things in place. For instance, there's power, agriculture, and also the red taping that goes around investing in Nigeria. With the reforms that Nigeria is making, well, we can see progress. But if we really want to retain investment, capital investment in Nigeria, and also encourage domestic investment, what reforms must Nigeria take on head on first off, so that we can start this, start creating jobs for people in Nigeria? Professor Ken, please.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with Professor on what he said about the second order importance of monetary policy. See, you start from the known to the unknown. For example, Dangote has broken the jinx without a doubt. Indorama is also doing well on the export of some of our plastic monomers and polymers. Now, these companies that have overcome the energy asymmetry and all the misalignments in the energy, build a cluster around them. If you look, I said that's why I keep saying to the minister, go and do a $50 billion ecosystem program around Dangote in Lekki. Dangote has 600 megawatts. It takes him only a marginal investment to have extra 100 megawatts for this cluster. and then all of them will be supplied and guaranteed their raw material for them to process, and they're all heading out to export. In Texas, you have 32 refineries and almost 5,000 petrochemical industries. Why can't you have 500 around Dangote and then do the same thing? There are all these companies that have their control of their energy and can do marginal expansion, can become the hub from which you can immediately move forward. When we were sworn in 2023, the Presidential Governing Council of Ministry of Finance Incorporated, I made the proposal. There are two companies that want to come to Nigeria on LNG, floating LNG. One is South Korea, the other one is Germany. They all wanted to invest $15 billion each, without the cost to Nigeria, give us prolific gas field offshore, and they'll come and do this, and they'll be giving us $20 million every day, $73 million a year. Two proposals, all of them competing with each other. I have pushed and pushed. I just gave up on that. Now let's move to the second bit. The second bit is that we know what we need to do for these companies to come in. The thing is the problem facing FDI. They are worried about the market conditions. They can't operate where you have this level of insecurity. Then they have raw material costs that are so exorbitant. Energy costs is pushing everything. I can't even process my cassava at this band A of 220 naira per liter. You can't make more money. But let's move to the third one, the policy. Now, the policy that the legal framework that governs borrowing, which is why I keep talking about fiscal inefficiency, is FRA 2007. What that law says is this: government can borrow to leverage the economic. They can, but under certain conditions. One, you must go for concessionary loan, which means usually around 3% or less. Two, you have to go for long-term loan, which means about 10 to 30 years thereabout. And then it says this must be for capital expenditure and human resource development. And when you come to capital expenditure, it's further explained is investment in infrastructure and in productive capacity. Then the other one on human resource development, we know what it is health, education, employment, and self-employment. It does not allow you to borrow money to share with anybody. It doesn't allow you to pay salary with money. It doesn't allow you budget support. It doesn't allow you to do all those.
Right.
Now he went further. Wait. He went further and says you must carry out cost-benefit analysis. Now this is where we have problem, because when the law says carry out cost-benefit analysis, it anticipates that when you are going to build infrastructure, you are going to be looking at economic corridors. You know, if you are going to do rail line or power or anything, if you consider economic corridor, industrial corridor, commercial corridor, residential corridor, you consider those because that's where the revenue will come for you to maintain the infrastructure.
Professor Ken.
So these things are weak. We are not doing them.
Right.
And instead, mismatching our borrowing.
Professor Ken.
That's why it's insufficient.
Right. I hate to cut you, but we're pretty much pressed for time and we have to go. But very quickly, as we're talking about human capital and, you know, increasing what's important when it comes to industrialization, we also have to talk about one key issue that we're leaving off of the table, and that was IMF's emphasis on stronger tax systems and closing the loopholes. Now, we've seen this administration when it comes to tax reform policy. And Professor Adi, you have raised concerns about that tax reform. Just to, you know, hammer on this, can Nigeria really close that gap? Is IMF looking at the other indices that means closing the gap, which is low purchasing power and the weaker naira with Nigerians? Very quickly, because we're pressed for time. Professor Adi.
I don't want to speak specifically to IMF because sometimes I don't think that they are very much at home with the issues about Nigeria, okay? Because they just gather data here and there and then analyze it. That's not the story. The thing about the tax, whether, you know, so I said I have my reservation about the tax because if you need to look at it in vis-a-vis purchasing power, what will happen to our purchasing power? What has already happened? Purchasing power has moved from $2,000 almost to $800 today. So Nigerians have become poorer. So even the people who are being taxed more are people actually, if you consider, you know, where they are coming from, they are not really poor. So it's just like taxing poverty. So that's going to worsen situations. But that be that as it may, it's going to transfer more money to the government coffers, but that's not the issue here. So see, what I'm interested in here, there's something I need to respond to, which is what Professor Ken said about building industrial clusters. The issue, so we should dwell less on this thing about the foreign direct investment. The investors we need to transform the economy are here with us. Okay, so we have domestic capital that could really transform this system if we really support them. Professor Ken said something which is very crucial: building industrial clusters around these who have done. So I want to dwell on what we can do to boost jobs, boost purchasing power. Actually, the way the exchange rate is today gives us that export advantage. So if we create more jobs here and enhance our productive capacity so that we're exporting, even if just to neighboring African countries, right? We are going to attract so much into the system. Think about Japan. Right. This, in fact, where Nigeria is now when it comes to macroeconomic structure is exactly where Japan was when they were leading the whole country and running trade surpluses with every country. That's exactly where China is right now. China is running trade surpluses with all their trading partners. Why? Because of the, so relatively the renminbi or the Chinese currency is kind of devalued unilaterally, because they need to use that to really drive export competitiveness. Right. Now we need to now focus on driving competitiveness in the economy so that we get the advantage. So I just don't want to talk about, what hasn't happened or the negativities. There are so many positives if we can get our policies and our actions right. All right. I mean, the reforms are kicking in January. That's the tax policy reforms. We wait to see the effect of that on the economy, the macroeconomics, and of course the inflation for Q1 of 2026. Mazino.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Personally, I just think that you can tax reform all you want, but as long as Nigeria is not producing, then where exactly will the masses you're taxing get that money from you want so desperately? But thank you very much, professors, for being our first guests here on the show today. It's been very enlightening. Thank you indeed.
Thank you.